It was one of those nights that felt too quiet for the city. The streets were empty, and the sky was the color of old smoke. A faint chill lingered in the air, the kind that made you pull your hoodie tighter without thinking. Malik Carter walked along the cracked sidewalk, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping the strap of his backpack. He was 17, tall, lean, thoughtful, the kind of boy who always looked like he had more on his mind than he said out loud. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. He liked walking home at night. The quiet made it easier to think. The world slowed down, and so did the noise inside his head. Tonight, though, something felt different. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the silence, deeper than usual, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Or maybe it was the way the streetlights buzzed and flickered, like they were tired too. Malik glanced down the street. He had only a few blocks to go. His mom would still be awake, probably watching her late-night talk shows with a blanket over her lap. He could already picture her half-smile when he walked through the door, that mix of relief and quiet worry that never really went away. She always said the same thing before he left the house. Keep your hands visible. Be polite. Don't give anyone a reason. He didn't like that she had to say it, but he understood. In their world, being careful wasn't fear, it was survival. He took a deep breath and kept walking. The night smelled like rain that never came. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. A stray dog trotted across the street and disappeared behind a trash bin. The world was calm, and for a moment he let himself enjoy that calm. But calm never lasts forever. Malik's shoes tapped lightly against the pavement. He was thinking about his test tomorrow, a math quiz he wasn't ready for, and about the drawing he'd started earlier that day. Art was his thing. It was how he made sense of everything: people, pain, questions that didn't have answers. He thought about his mom again. She'd been working late shifts at the hospital for as long as he could remember. She'd come home with tired eyes and a smile that still somehow carried warmth. He remembered her saying once, "People will look at you and make decisions before you say a word. So make sure the first word you say is worth hearing." He never forgot that. As he passed the old convenience store on the corner, he noticed the familiar, closed sign hanging crookedly on the glass door. The light inside was off, but the faint glow of the streetlight outside caught his reflection in the glass. For a moment he looked at himself, hoodie up, backpack slung to the side, headphones around his neck. He didn't look dangerous. He looked like a kid walking home. He sighed softly and turned the corner. That's when he heard it, the low hum of an engine behind him. At first, he didn't think much of it. Cars passed through all the time. But this one was moving slowly. Too slowly. He glanced back. Headlights. Bright. Steady. Following. A police car. The sight made his stomach tighten, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he'd seen this story too many times. He turned back around, kept walking, kept his posture relaxed. Hands out of pockets, head up, eyes forward. That's what his mom had taught him. The car crept closer. The sound of its tires on the road was steady and deliberate. The glow of its headlights grew stronger until it stretched his shadow across the street. Malik's heartbeat quickened. He told himself to stay calm. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Then the sound came, a short, sharp chirp from the siren. He stopped walking. The noise was small, but it carried the weight of command. He turned slowly, trying not to move too fast. The police car rolled to a stop a few feet behind him. The doors opened, and two officers stepped out. One was older, maybe in his 40s, with tired eyes and a calm voice. The other was younger, his expression sharp, alert, almost eager. "Evening," the older one said. His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't friendly either. "Evening," Malik replied, his voice steady. "Where you headed?" "Home, sir. Just got done studying at a friend's house." The younger officer crossed his arms. "Got ID?" "Yes, sir." Malik moved slowly, pulling his wallet from his pocket. He handed it over. The older officer took it, looked it over, then handed it back. "Lot of break-ins around here lately," he said. "Just keeping an eye out." Malik nodded. "I understand. Mind if we look in your bag?" the younger one asked. Malik hesitated. "Is there a reason, officer?" The question came out calm, respectful, exactly how his mom had taught him to speak when he was nervous. The younger officer frowned. The older one raised a hand, a silent signal for his partner to ease up. "It's all right," the older man said. "You can go ahead." But no one moved. For a few seconds, all three of them just stood there. The only sound was the faint hum of the streetlight above. Malik felt his pulse in his fingertips. He wasn't scared, not exactly. It was something else, a mix of confusion and sadness. He wanted to ask, "Why me?" But he already knew. He'd felt this kind of attention before, in stores, in hallways, in moments that were too quiet to explain. The older officer seemed to read the question in his eyes. His tone softened. "You can go home now, son," he said quietly. "Be safe out there." Malik nodded. "Thank you, sir." He turned to leave, but then paused. Something in him didn't want to just walk away this time. He turned back. His voice was low but clear. "Sir, can I ask why I looked suspicious to you?" The younger officer shifted, caught off guard by the question. The older one blinked, hesitated, and then said, "It's just part of the job. We check things out." Malik nodded again, thinking. His next words came out gentle, but they carried weight. "I get that, sir. I just hope one day, walking home won't be something people need to check." The street was quiet after that. The older officer looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Get home safe, kid." Malik nodded once more and started walking. The night felt heavier now. He could still feel their eyes on his back, even after he turned the corner. Each step home sounded louder than before. His thoughts spun in quiet circles. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He was just tired. Tired of moments that didn't need to happen. He thought of his mom again. How she'd probably ask if he was okay the second he got home. He'd tell her yes, like always. He wouldn't tell her about this. He didn't want her to worry. The lights from the police car faded in the distance. The hum of the engine disappeared. For a few seconds, everything was still again. Malik looked up at the night sky. It was dark, but not empty. Somewhere behind the haze, the stars were still there, invisible but real. He whispered softly to himself, "Almost home." As he turned onto his street, a window curtain moved from one of the houses behind him. Someone had seen the whole thing, a neighbor awake late, watching quietly. A phone had been in their hand, recording the interaction. Malik didn't know. He just kept walking, thinking the moment was over. But the video would find its way online the next morning. A simple clip of a calm teenager asking a simple question, and two officers who didn't quite know how to answer it. People would share it. People would argue about it. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Malik would become a name everyone suddenly wanted to know. But for now, it was still just him, a boy walking home under the streetlights, unaware that his life had just changed. He reached his house and stopped at the gate. He could see the warm light from the living room glowing through the window. His mom was there, half asleep on the couch, just like he imagined. He smiled faintly. He walked inside quietly, placed his backpack by the door, and went straight to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed, shoes still on, staring at the floor. For a while he just listened, to the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the silence that fills a house after midnight. He didn't realize his hands were shaking until he looked down at them. He took a deep breath and whispered, "It's okay." But deep down, something had shifted. He didn't know why, but he felt it, a small change like the air before a storm. In another part of the city, the two officers sat in their cruiser, neither speaking. The older one finally broke the silence. "You ever wonder what we look like to them?" The younger one didn't answer. Daniel sighed, resting his hand on the steering wheel. "Sometimes I think we forget they're just kids." Reed stared out the window, watching the streetlights pass. "He handled himself better than most grown men I've seen." Daniels nodded slowly. "Yeah, he did." The car turned a corner and disappeared into the night. Back in his room, Malik lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind was full, but his body was still. He thought about what he said, about how calm he sounded, about the look in the officer's eyes right before they drove away. He didn't plan to say anything that would change the world. He just spoke what he felt, and somehow it came out right. He didn't know anyone was listening. He didn't know that simple moment of honesty would travel further than he ever imagined. For now, it was just a quiet night, and a boy who'd finally drifted to sleep, unaware that the world had already started to shift around him. And sometimes, that's how change begins. Not with noise, not with anger, but with calm, with truth, with one quiet voice that refused to disappear. The night was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. This one felt heavier, like the air itself had learned to listen. Malik didn't know it yet, but the world hadn't forgotten about him. Not the officers, not the street, not even the silence that followed after. For the officers, it hadn't ended when he walked away. For Malik, it hadn't really started yet. Officer Daniels drove in silence. The hum of the patrol car filled the space between him and Officer Reed. The radio murmured softly, dispatch updates that neither man was really hearing. "Another night," Reed said finally, glancing out the window. Daniels nodded, eyes on the road. "Yeah." They passed dark houses, streetlights casting patterns on the dashboard. Reed tapped his fingers against his knee, restless. "You think we were right to stop him?" he asked. Daniels didn't answer right away. "You think we weren't?" "I don't know. Just feels like we're doing this more and more lately. People walking, we stop them, ask questions, check IDs. Feels like it doesn't change anything." Daniels sighed, rubbing his temple. "You're new, Reed. You'll learn this job's not about what feels right. It's about what keeps the peace." Reed turned toward him. "Peace for who?" Daniels didn't respond. He just drove on. The car turned onto another block, and once again there was someone walking. This time another young man, hood up, hands in his pockets. Reed looked at Daniels. Daniels looked at Reed. Neither spoke for a moment. "Same kid?" Reed asked. Daniels squinted. "No. Different hoodie." He slowed the car anyway. Reed leaned forward. "You sure?" Daniels nodded, but his hand still reached for the switch on the light bar. It happened slowly, the car rolling to a crawl, the lights flicking on, the beams stretching across the pavement. The young man looked up, startled. He wasn't Malik. His name was Jameer, a friend from the same school. He lived 2 streets over. But at a glance, in that dim light, they could have been reflections of each other. Reed said, "We just talked to someone like him earlier. Same area." Daniels didn't reply. He parked. The tires crunched softly against the curb. Reed's hand hovered near his flashlight. Daniels' hand rested near the door handle. Inside the car, the air felt tense, not because of danger, but because of something unspoken. Reed wanted to prove something. Daniels wanted to prevent something. Neither knew exactly what. When Daniels stepped out, the cold hit him first. He zipped his jacket and adjusted his belt. Reed followed, more rigid, more alert. The young man, Jameer, stopped walking and turned to face them. His eyes flickered between the 2 men, his posture uncertain but polite. "Evening," Daniels said, voice even. Jameer nodded. "Evening, officers. You live around here?" "Yes, sir." "Where you heading?" "Home. Just got off work." Reed took a small step forward, shining his flashlight near Jameer's backpack. "What's in the bag?" "Work clothes," Jameer answered. "Mind if we take a look?" Jameer hesitated, shifting his weight. "Why?" "Routine check," Reed replied. Daniels glanced at him, a silent warning to ease his tone. But Reed didn't notice, or didn't care. Jameer's eyes flicked to the ground, then back up. "Am I being accused of something?" "No," Daniels said quickly. "Just a few questions, that's all." Reed frowned. "If you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem." The words hit the air like cold wind. Jameer's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. His hand trembled slightly at his side. Daniels noticed. "Easy," Daniels said quietly. "We're not here to give you trouble." But even as he said it, he could hear the distance in his own voice, the kind that builds between authority and understanding. The radio crackled suddenly. A voice from dispatch cut through the tension. "Unit 12, respond to possible disturbance near Grove Park." Daniels pressed the mic. "Copy that. Dispatch." He looked at Reed. "We're clear here." Reed hesitated. His expression was unreadable, frustration mixed with pride. He took a half-step back, but didn't lower his flashlight. Jameer stayed still, breathing shallow, eyes darting between them. "All right," Daniels said finally. "You can go." Jameer nodded. "Thank you, sir." He turned and walked away, slow and careful. Daniels watched him disappear into the dark. Reed stared at the ground. "You're thinking too much," Daniels muttered, sliding back into the car. "Maybe," Reed said. "Or maybe not enough." By the time they reached Grove Park, the disturbance had already been handled by another unit. They sat in the car, waiting for the next call. The windows fogged slightly from their breath. Daniels leaned back, tired. "You're overanalyzing, kid. That's what gets rookies burned out." Reed looked out the window. "I just don't get why we stop them if there's no cause. Every night it's the same. You don't see people like us getting stopped for walking home." Daniels rubbed his face. "You want to make a difference? You do it from inside the system, not by questioning every order." Reed shook his head. "Maybe that's the problem." Daniels didn't reply. They drove on in silence for a few minutes. The radio crackled again, another routine call. But neither man reached for the mic. Malik sat at his kitchen table, tracing lines in his sketchbook. He couldn't sleep. The image he kept drawing was the same, Two figures standing in the streetlight, one holding power, the other holding calm. He didn't understand why he couldn't let the moment go. It should have been simple. A stop, a question, and then he went home. But it wasn't simple. It felt like something had opened that night, something small but real. He remembered the officer's eyes, the confusion there, the moment before he answered. Malik didn't hate him. He didn't even blame him. He just couldn't stop wondering, what made me look suspicious? He looked down at his drawing again. This time, he shaded the figure on the left, the one standing calm, steady, patient. Maybe that's all he wanted, to be seen for what he really was. By dawn, the city had already moved on. Cars filled the streets, buses hissed at their stops, and the news carried on like nothing happened. But in one house, a phone buzzed repeatedly. It was Jordan, Malik's friend. "Bro, you're on the internet." Malik blinked awake, still half asleep. "What?" "The video. Somebody filmed you last night, talking to the cops." Malik sat up. His heart skipped. "What video?" "Check your phone." He opened the link. The video was short, less than a minute. It showed him standing under the streetlight, talking calmly to the officers, asking that single question. "Can I ask why I looked suspicious to you?" It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But there was something about it, something human, something that made people stop scrolling. The comments were endless. Some praised his calm. Some questioned the officers. Others argued, dissected, debated. Malik just stared at the screen. He didn't know how to feel. He hadn't planned to be a symbol. He just wanted to walk home. Officer Daniels sat at his desk, scrolling through his phone. The same video played on his screen. He didn't know it had been recorded. He didn't even remember the neighbor who'd been standing in the window. Reed walked in, holding a cup of coffee. "You've seen it." Daniels nodded slowly. "Yeah." Reed frowned. "People online are calling us racist now." Daniels didn't respond. He watched the video again, watched the boy's expression, his tone, his composure. He saw something in that kid that he couldn't quite name. "He handled himself well," Daniels said finally. Reed scoffed. "He made us look bad." Daniels shook his head. "No. He made us look human." Reed didn't answer. He took a sip of his coffee, his jaw tightening. By afternoon, reporters were calling the station. Some wanted statements. Others wanted apologies. Daniels gave none. Reed gave one, defensive, clipped, irritated. Malik stayed home from school. His mom wanted to call the police department, but he asked her not to. "I don't want to start anything," he said quietly. "I just want this to stop." She looked at him for a long time, sadness in her eyes. "It's already started, baby. You didn't choose it." Malik looked down. "Maybe I did, by saying something." She smiled softly. "Then maybe that's a good thing." The streets looked the same, but they weren't. People noticed him now. Some waved, others nodded, a few just stared. He didn't know what to do with that attention. He walked slower, not out of fear, but reflection. Every corner reminded him of last night. The air smelled of rain again. When he reached the same intersection, he stopped. The memory returned, the headlights, the voices, the question. He stood there for a while, just breathing, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. It wasn't anger he felt. It was something deeper, a quiet determination. He whispered softly, "It's not about what happened. It's about what I do next. Daniels drove alone that night. Reed had taken the day off after too many phone calls and too many reporters. The city lights blurred past. Daniels' thoughts were heavy. He'd been on the job long enough to know when something was more than just another stop. He thought about Malik's question. He thought about how easy it was to confuse vigilance with suspicion. He pulled over for a moment, parked, and turned off the engine. The silence filled the car. For the first time in years, Daniels felt uncertain, not about his duty, but about his understanding of it. He whispered to himself, "What are we doing out here?" The question hung in the air, as heavy as the night itself. And somewhere, blocks away, Malik lay awake, staring at the same stars, wondering the same thing, in his own way. Two lives, both asking the same question from different sides of the same line. The video had been online for 2 days. By then, millions had seen it. Some watched with admiration, saying the boy's composure was remarkable. Others argued endlessly in the comments. But for Malik, none of that mattered. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He just wanted to understand. Still, something inside him had shifted. The world had changed around him, and quietly he was beginning to change too. It was a Saturday morning when the phone started ringing again. Reporters, teachers, old friends, everyone wanted to talk. Malik sat at the kitchen table, staring at his untouched bowl of cereal. His mother answered one of the calls, her voice polite but tired. "He's not giving interviews right now," she said softly. "He's just a student." She hung up and sat down across from him. "You all right, baby?" He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "They keep calling," she said gently. "You don't have to say anything to anyone." Malik looked at her. "Maybe I should." She frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because everyone's talking about what happened, but nobody's listening to what I meant." Her expression softened. "And what did you mean?" Malik hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't ask that question to embarrass anyone. I just wanted to understand. If people don't ask questions, how does anything ever change?" His mother leaned back in her chair, studying him. There was a quiet pride in her eyes, mixed with the kind of fear that only mothers carry. "Your father used to talk like that," she said after a pause. "Always asking, always pushing." He smiled faintly. "Guess I got it from him." Her voice softened. "Just remember, words are powerful, but silence is too. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting ever could." Malik thought about that for a long time. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When Malik opened it, Officer Daniels was standing there. He wasn't in uniform, just a plain jacket and a face that looked more worn than before. "Hey," Daniels said quietly. "Can we talk?" Malik hesitated, surprised. His mom stepped into the hallway, cautious. "It's okay," she said, though her tone wasn't sure. "Go ahead." Malik stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. They stood on the porch for a moment, both unsure how to begin. "I saw the video," Daniel said. "Didn't know someone was filming." Malik nodded. "Me neither." Daniels rubbed his hands together. "You handled yourself well. Better than most grown men I've dealt with." "Thank you," Malik said quietly. There was a pause. Neither man filled it right away. Finally, Daniels asked, "You really want to know why we stopped you?" Malik looked up at him. "Yes, sir. I do." Daniels sighed. "You didn't do anything wrong." But sometimes we make decisions based on what looks unusual. And maybe that's not fair. Maybe it's habit. Malik tilted his head. Habit can be dangerous. Daniels nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. The silence stretched between them again. But it wasn't hostile this time. It was heavy, like two people standing on either side of something too large to explain. Daniels finally said, "You made me think that night. That's not something I say often." Malik didn't know what to say to that. So he just nodded. "Anyway," Daniels added, stepping back, "I just wanted to tell you that." Malik hesitated. "Thank you for saying it." Daniels started to turn away, but Malik's voice stopped him. "Sir," he said softly, "I know it's not easy doing your job. I get that. But it's not easy being on the other side either." Daniels turned back. Their eyes met, not as officer and suspect, but as two human beings trying to understand one another. For the first time, there was no fear between them. That night, Malik lay awake, staring at the ceiling again. He kept hearing his mother's voice in his head, the words she'd told him since he was young. When people look at you and expect the worst, surprise them with your best. Not to prove them wrong, but to remind yourself who you are. He was only 9 the first time she said it. That day, he'd come home crying because a teacher thought he'd stolen another student's pencil. He hadn't. But the teacher didn't believe him until the real pencil turned up later. Malik had sat in his room that evening, fists clenched, asking his mom why it always seemed like people didn't believe him first. She'd knelt in front of him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "You can't control what people see," she said, "but you can control how you respond. That's your power. Never give that away." He hadn't fully understood it back then, but he did now. That night on the street, he didn't just remember her advice. He lived it. 2 days later, Malik agreed to do one interview, not with a big news outlet, but with a local radio host his mom trusted. The studio was small and quiet. The interviewer, a woman named Ms. Fields, smiled gently as she adjusted her microphone. "Malik," she said softly, "you've become something of a voice for calm in chaos. How does that feel?" He smiled awkwardly. "Honestly, I'm just a student. I never meant for any of this to happen. But the way you responded that night, it struck people. What was going through your mind when you asked that question?" Malik thought for a moment. "I wasn't trying to argue. I just wanted to understand why being calm and walking home could look suspicious. I thought maybe if I asked, someone might stop and think." Ms. Fields nodded slowly. "And they did. Many people saw that video and said it made them rethink things." He looked down, then back up. "That's good. But I hope they don't just rethink how they see me. I hope they rethink how they see anyone who looks like me." There was a pause, the kind of pause that holds truth in it. Then Miss Fields asked quietly, "What gave you the courage to respond that way instead of getting angry?" Malik smiled faintly. "My mom. She always says, anger is like fire. It burns the one holding it first. So when I feel it, I try to turn it into words instead." Back at the precinct, Daniel sat at his desk, listening to that same interview playing on the radio. Reed walked by, paused, and stood behind him. "That him?" Reed asked. Daniels nodded. "Yeah." They both listened in silence for a few seconds. Reed finally muttered, "He sounds smart." Daniels looked up. "He is smart." Reed shifted uncomfortably. "You think we handled it wrong?" Daniels sighed. "I think we handled it the way we were taught. Doesn't mean it was right." Reed frowned. "You saying you regret it?" Daniels looked out the window. "I'm saying I'm thinking." The radio crackled again. Malik's voice echoed softly. "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strength." Neither man spoke after that. The air in the office felt still, like the room itself was listening. A week later, Malik decided to clear his head. He walked to the park near his school, sketchbook in hand. It was quiet there, trees whispering, kids playing in the distance, the hum of life carrying softly through the air. He sat on a bench and began to draw, not faces this time, but moments. A police badge beside a notebook. A streetlight casting both shadow and light. He didn't realize Daniels was there until he heard a voice behind him. "You draw." Malik looked up. "Yeah. Helps me think." Daniels nodded, hands in his pockets. "You're good." Malik smiled slightly. "Thanks." Daniels sat down on the edge of the bench. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Malik said, "Do you ever feel like you're doing the right thing the wrong way?" Daniels looked at him, surprised. "Every day." Malik nodded. "Me too. I think that's what happened that night. We were both trying to do the right thing, just from different sides." Daniels exhaled slowly. "You're right." There was a long pause before Malik spoke again. "You ever read Dr. King?" Daniels smiled faintly. "A little." Malik flipped a page in his sketchbook, revealing a quote he'd written at the bottom. "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools." Daniels read it and nodded. "That's a good one." "Yeah," Malik said quietly. "It's my favorite." As the sun began to set, Daniels stood up. "I think you're going to do something important with your life, Malik." Malik looked up at him. "I hope so. I just want to do something that matters." Daniels nodded. "You already have." Malik smiled, unsure what to say. Daniels took a few steps away, then stopped. He turned back, his voice softer than Malik had ever heard it. "You know what I realized that night?" Malik shook his head. "I realized I was scared, not of you, but of being wrong. And that's the thing most people never admit. We all want to believe we're the good guys. But sometimes, being good starts with admitting when you weren't." Malik didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Daniels gave a small nod and walked away, leaving Malik alone with the fading light and his thoughts. That night, Malik wrote in his journal. He wrote about fear. He wrote about silence. He wrote about the way people look at one another and how much could change if they just stopped to listen. He ended with a single line. "Sometimes the loudest change begins in the quietest moment." He closed the notebook and looked out his window. The same streetlights still buzzed, the same shadows stretched across the pavement. But they didn't look the same anymore. Something about them felt softer, like the world had taken one small breath of understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The morning after the interview aired, the world around Malik no longer felt like the same place. The air outside seemed sharper. The faces of strangers lingered a bit longer. And his phone, his quiet little world of playlists and messages, had become a constant stream of noise. He'd thought that maybe the video would fade. Maybe people would move on. But they hadn't. Instead, it had spread faster than anyone expected. Some called him a hero. Some called him naive. And some just called him lucky. At first, Malik didn't believe how far it had gone. His friend Jordan showed him the numbers on his phone, scrolling through millions of views and hundreds of comments. "Man, you're everywhere," Jordan said, shaking his head. You're on the news, Twitter, even the school board shared it. Malik stared at the screen, expressionless. I didn't want this. I know, Jordan said softly. But people needed it. Malik didn't answer. He just locked the phone and set it down. He didn't feel like a voice for anything. He felt like a person stuck in someone else's story. At school, the attention followed him like a shadow. Teachers greeted him with soft smiles. Students whispered when he walked by. Some wanted to shake his hand. Others wanted a picture. One girl in his history class leaned over and whispered, "You're really brave, you know." Malik smiled faintly. "Thanks." But inside, it didn't feel like bravery. It felt like being seen in ways he didn't ask for. Home. His mother watched every new headline with a conflicted heart. Each time she saw his name, she felt both pride and worry. That evening, she came home from work and found him sitting quietly on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "They're talking about you on the evening news again," she said softly. He nodded. "I know." She sat beside him. "You doing okay?" He shrugged. "I don't know. I didn't mean for all this to happen." "I know you didn't." She reached for his hand. "But sometimes, things find you." He looked at her. "It doesn't feel right, Mom. They're turning it into a debate. It's not about what I said anymore." Her voice stayed calm. "That's what happens when the world is loud. But the truth, you know what that is. You hold on to that." He nodded, trying to believe her. But the world outside didn't feel quiet enough for truth to survive. Across town, in the police station's break room, the video played again on someone's phone. A few officers watched in silence. Some shook their heads. Others muttered under their breath. "Kids just trying to look smart," one said. Another replied, "He wasn't disrespectful." He handled himself better than half the people we stop. Daniels listened quietly from the corner, sipping his coffee. Reed stood beside him, scrolling through angry comments online. "They're saying we profiled him," Reed muttered. "Saying we need to be fired." Daniels said nothing. His gaze stayed fixed on the video. He watched the boy's face, his calm tone, the control in his eyes. "He didn't raise his voice once," Daniels said softly. Reed scoffed. "Yeah, well, good for him. Doesn't mean he gets to make us look bad." Daniels sighed. "He didn't make us look bad, Reed. We did that to ourselves." Reed's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Later that day, the chief called Daniels into his office. They talked for nearly an hour, about media, perception, responsibility. When Daniels walked out, his shoulders were heavier than before. For Malik, the world had turned into noise. Notifications, messages, interviews, invitations. Everyone wanted something, a quote, a statement, a reaction. His guidance counselor asked if he'd consider speaking at a youth event. A local non-profit wanted to feature him in a Voices for Justice campaign. Even strangers sent letters to his house. At first, he tried to reply to some of them, but after a while, he stopped. He didn't know what to say anymore. Some messages were kind, people thanking him for his composure. Others were cruel, accusing him of lying or seeking attention. He deleted most of them, but a few stayed with him. One message read, "You reminded me that staying calm doesn't mean being weak. Thank you." Another said, "My son watched your video. He's 12. He said, that's how I want to handle things when I grow up." Those were the ones that mattered. A week later, a major news network reached out. They wanted to film an exclusive feature, the teen who spoke calmly to power. His mom didn't like the sound of it. "You don't owe anyone your story," she told him. Malik nodded, but something inside him whispered that maybe it was time to speak, not to perform, but to explain. He thought about it for 2 days. Then he said yes. The interview took place in a community center. The host, a woman named Dana, had a voice that carried both warmth and curiosity. "Malik," she began, "millions of people have seen your video. Many call you an inspiration. How does that feel?" He paused, searching for the right words. "I think people needed something quiet," he said finally. "Something that reminded them that calm doesn't mean silence." Dana leaned forward. "You handled yourself with such restraint that night. Were you afraid?" Malik hesitated. "Yes. But fear doesn't have to decide what happens next. My mom always says, you can't control how people act, but you can control how you respond. That's what I was trying to do." Dana smiled softly. "Do you think things are changing?" Malik looked down for a moment. "I think people are talking. And maybe that's where change begins." That same night, Daniel sat in his car outside the precinct, listening to the interview on the radio. He hadn't been asked to speak publicly. His superiors wanted silence, not more headlines. But the words still reached him. Fear doesn't have to decide what happens next. He turned off the radio and sat in the dark for a while. He thought about all the stops he'd made in his 20 years on the job, how many faces he'd forgotten, how many names he never asked. Then he thought of Malik, and he realized he would never forget him. Inside the station, Reed was filling out paperwork. When Daniels walked in, Reed glanced up. "Chief says there's going to be a review," he said flatly. "We'll probably get questioned." Daniels nodded. "That's fair." Reed frowned. "You serious?" "Yeah," Daniels said quietly. "We need to be. Otherwise nothing changes." Reed looked away. "You're letting that kid get in your head." Daniels didn't answer. But maybe that was true. Maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. A week later, Malik was invited to speak at a local community forum. He didn't want to be on a stage, but he wanted to tell the truth in his own words. His mom came with him, sitting in the front row. When it was his turn, he walked up to the small podium, hands slightly trembling. The room was packed. Students, parents, officers, reporters. He looked out at the faces, took a breath, and began. "I've been called a lot of things this past month. Brave, smart, lucky. But I'm just a kid who asked a question." He paused. The room was silent. "I didn't plan to make a point that night. I just wanted to understand why being me, walking home, wearing a hoodie, looked suspicious." He glanced toward the row of uniformed officers near the back. "I don't hate the police. I don't hate anyone. But I do believe we can do better at seeing each other as people before we see each other as threats." His voice wavered slightly, but he kept going. "My mom always told me, you can't fight fire with fire. I think maybe the world's been burning too long. Maybe it's time we tried water instead." When he finished, there was no loud applause, just a long, heavy silence. The kind of silence that meant people were thinking. Then, slowly, people began to stand. Not cheering, just standing. Respectful. Present. Listening. His mother wiped a tear quietly. Later that night, Daniel saw clips of the speech online. He watched the boy he'd once stopped in the middle of the street speak with more wisdom than most adults he knew. He turned off the video halfway through, not because he didn't want to hear it, but because it hit too close. He saw himself in that story, in the silence, in the guilt. He picked up his phone and typed a message, then deleted it. He tried again, shorter this time. "You did good, kid." He stared at it, then erased it again. Some things didn't need to be said. Some things just needed to be lived differently. Fame, even the quiet kind, comes with a price. Malik started losing sleep. He tried to stay off his phone, but every time he did, someone sent him a new article, a new headline. His teachers gave him extra time on assignments, his classmates treated him differently, and his friends didn't know how to act around him anymore. Jordan said, "You good man?" Malik forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But the truth was deeper. He felt like a visitor in his own life. Everywhere he went, people expected something: wisdom, answers, calm. And though he carried himself with grace, inside he was just trying to catch his breath. One night, his mother found him sitting on the porch alone. He hadn't turned on the light. The air was cool, the sky quiet. She sat down beside him. "You haven't been sleeping," she said gently. He nodded. "I don't know how. Every time I close my eyes, I hear my name in someone else's voice." She placed her hand on his back. "You don't have to be the world's voice, Malik. Just be yours." He looked at her. "What if they stop listening if I don't speak?" "Then let them," she said softly. "Silence isn't absence. It's rest." He let her words sink in, the way he always did. She had a way of making the world smaller and kinder with just a few sentences. The next morning, Malik turned down a national interview. He decided to go back to being a student, to walking home, to sketching again. The story would move on. People would find new ones. But Malik would keep his peace. He didn't see it as retreat. He saw it as choosing quiet again, the same quiet that started everything. Weeks later, the noise finally began to fade. The headlines slowed, the calls stopped, and life returned to something close to normal. At least, on the surface. Malik still walked home the same route every night. He still wore his hoodie, still carried his backpack, still listened to the hum of the streetlights. But now, when he looked around, things felt different. He'd see more patrol cars slowing down, but not stopping. He'd see neighbors nodding as he passed. Small things. But sometimes, small things meant the most. One night, as he turned the corner toward home, he saw Daniels standing by his patrol car again. They hadn't spoken since the park. Daniels looked up, gave a small nod. Malik nodded back. For a moment, neither spoke. The streetlight hummed softly above them. Then Daniels asked, almost quietly, "What are you doing out here?" It wasn't suspicion this time. It was something gentler, a shared acknowledgment of where everything had begun. Malik smiled faintly. "Just walking home, sir." Daniels nodded, a small, almost invisible smile crossing his face. "All right then," he said. "Get home safe." Malik turned and kept walking. Behind him, the night stayed quiet. No sirens, no shouts, no noise. Just peace. And for the first time in a long time, that peace felt real. Time has a strange way of stretching around moments that matter. The night of the stop had lasted minutes. The video had lasted less than one. But its echo kept moving. Through screens, through newsrooms, through people's conversations in coffee shops and classrooms. For Malik, life tried to return to normal. For everyone else, it had only just begun. By mid-month, every network had found its way to the story. Reporters used words like symbol, hope, and change. Panel shows dissected his calm as if it were a strategy. Clips of his interview played beside talking heads arguing about policing, race, and respect. Some praised him as a model of peaceful resistance. Others accused him of being coached or performative. The more people talked, the less the story seemed to belong to him. At home, Malik stopped turning on the television. He recognized his own face there sometimes, framed between commentary and commercials, but the voiceover never sounded like his. It was louder, harsher, too certain about what it thought he meant. He muted the noise. In classrooms and offices, people began to talk differently. At Westview High, Malik's principal held a meeting with students and teachers. They discussed what bias looked like in everyday life, how small assumptions could ripple outward just like Malik's story had. One student said quietly, "It makes me think about how I cross the street when I see certain people. I never meant anything by it." The room went still. Another student replied, "That's kind of the point." The conversation didn't solve anything, but it opened something, a doorway where silence used to live. Across town, Officer Daniels sat in a community meeting at a local library. He wasn't speaking, he was just listening. Parents asked questions, teenagers shared fears, a pastor read a poem about seeing and being seen. For once, Daniels didn't feel defensive. He felt human. When someone asked, "Do officers ever get scared?" he answered honestly, "Every night." The room didn't judge him. They just nodded, understanding in a new way that fear wasn't one-sided. Online, the story kept splitting into pieces. Some people shared it with captions like, "This is how change begins." Others used it to argue that nothing ever changes at all. A few groups formed around the moment, hashtags calling for new policies, workshops in schools, training sessions for officers. But the louder it got, the more Malik felt detached. He wasn't leading a movement. He hadn't written a speech or organized a march. He'd asked one question. Now the world was answering itself. Jordan showed him a video compilation, teachers showing the clip in classrooms, community centers discussing it. "You realize, man," Jordan said, "you started something." Malik smiled faintly. "I didn't start it. People just needed a reason to keep talking." Inside the precinct, Daniels noticed things shifting too. A new training module appeared on the schedule: bias awareness and de-escalation. Some officers rolled their eyes. Others signed up quietly. Daniels attended the first session. The instructor began by playing the video, Malik standing under the streetlight, asking his calm, impossible question. Watching it there, in a room full of uniforms, felt different. There was no anger now, only recognition, the heavy understanding that one moment of stillness could reveal years of unspoken tension. After the session, Daniels lingered behind. The instructor asked, "What did you take from it?" Daniels thought for a moment. That control doesn't always mean authority. Sometimes it just means listening. The instructor nodded. That's a good start. In Malik's neighborhood, things felt quieter but warmer. Neighbors he barely knew started greeting him by name. The owner of the corner store kept his register open a few minutes later whenever Malik passed by. Even kids from the next block waved when they saw him. But not everyone was comfortable. Some people whispered that he'd brought attention to the area. Others said police cars passed through less often now, and no one could decide if that was better or worse. Malik tried not to dwell on it. He helped his mom with groceries, drew in his sketchbook, went to class, came home. He lived as simply as he could inside the complexity that surrounded him. One afternoon, Malik's history teacher asked him to stay after class. "I know you're tired of talking about it," she said gently, "but I wanted to ask if you'd help me design a lesson plan, something about civic responsibility and empathy." Malik hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm qualified." She smiled. "You lived it. That counts." He thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But only if we make it about everyone, not just me." They spent the next week writing discussion prompts together. What does fairness look like? What does fear feel like? What does calm change? When the lesson was taught, Malik sat quietly in the back of the room. He listened as other students debated, sometimes disagreeing, sometimes understanding. It was messy but honest, and that felt like progress. By the third month, the story had transformed into something bigger. Documentaries began exploring the calm question. Podcasts debated the Malik moment as a case study in emotional intelligence. A non-profit started a scholarship fund in his name for students interested in criminal justice reform. Malik's mother cried when she heard. He didn't. He just sat quietly, unsure how to feel about his name becoming a headline, a cause, a brand. He wanted people to care, just not because of him. At night, Malik still walked the same streets. Sometimes he'd stop at the same intersection where everything had begun. The streetlight had been fixed. It no longer flickered. He'd stand there and listen, to the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant traffic, the faint murmur of life continuing. He'd remember how small he felt that night, and how large the silence had become afterward. The world had changed because of that silence, but it was still the same street, the same boy, the same heartbeat under the noise. Months later, a plain envelope arrived at Malik's house with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper. It read, "Malik, I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that your question changed more than you think. I've been part of this department for 21 years. I thought I understood what fairness meant. That night made me realize I'd forgotten how to listen. There's a new mentorship program starting. We're calling it The Bridge. It's small now, just a few officers meeting with high school students twice a month. You don't need to come, but I wanted you to know it exists because of you. Daniels." Malik read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it between the pages of his sketchbook. He didn't tell anyone about it. Some things were meant to stay quiet. Online, the arguments never really stopped. New articles questioned whether one calm conversation could change anything. Some people said Malik's story was proof that good kids were the exception. Others said the point was that no one should have to prove goodness. He learned to stop reading the comments. He learned that not every echo was meant to be answered. Instead, he focused on small acts, helping younger students with homework, volunteering at an after-school art club, listening when people told their own stories. Because that, he realized, was what real change looked like. Not headlines, but habits. The community center began hosting monthly walk and talks, events where residents and police officers walked the neighborhood together. No uniforms, no tension, just conversation. At first, turnout was small, but by the third month, dozens showed up. Parents pushing strollers, teens in hoodies, officers without radios. Daniels attended every time. So did Malik, though they rarely spoke directly. They didn't need to. Presence was enough. One evening, after everyone left, Daniels stayed behind to pick up discarded flyers. He saw Malik sketching on the steps. "What are you drawing?" Daniels asked quietly. Malik smiled. "The people who showed up." Daniels looked around. "You've got a lot of them to draw." Malik nodded. That's a good problem to have. Back at school, Malik's teacher asked the students to write essays about moments that changed how they saw the world. Most wrote about family or friends, a few about Malik himself. When it was his turn, he handed in a short essay titled Stillness. It began, "The world moves too fast to notice how quiet can teach us. I learned that stillness isn't the absence of strength, it's what gives strength shape." His teacher read it aloud the next day. The class didn't clap. They just listened. As the months rolled forward, newer stories filled the headlines. Other names, other faces, other moments of injustice and courage. The internet, always hungry, moved on. But here and there, the clip resurfaced, in a presentation, in a classroom, in a training manual. Each time, it reached someone new. Each time, the question echoed quietly again. Why did he look suspicious? And with every replay, maybe one more person paused before judging, before assuming, before reacting. That was the ripple. Not loud, not instant, but steady. One evening, Malik sat at his desk, writing in the worn notebook he always carried. He wrote about everything and nothing. How the world could feel heavy and kind at the same time. How people could change without realizing it. How silence could travel farther than sound. He wrote, "I used to think change was something big. Laws, protests, speeches. Now I think it's smaller. Maybe change is one person pausing before they act. Maybe that's enough." He closed the notebook, placed it beside his bed, and looked out the window. The same street stretched outside, quiet, calm, ordinary. A patrol car rolled past slowly, its headlights sweeping gently across the pavement. No sirens, no shouts, no stops. Just passing through. Malik watched it disappear, then whispered to himself, "Peace doesn't always make noise." He smiled, turned off the light, and let the night settle around him. The ripple had started long ago. It was still moving, not in headlines, but in hearts. And sometimes, that's where change truly lives. The seasons changed before Malik realized how much time had passed. The air turned warmer, the trees on Maple Street green again. The world didn't feel lighter, but Malik did. Months had slipped quietly between interviews, meetings, and reflection. He wasn't the same boy who had stood under the flickering streetlight that night. He still wore the same hoodie sometimes, still took the same walk home, but something inside him had shifted, like the ground had steadied beneath his feet. He was learning how to move differently now, not just through streets, but through life. One morning, his mother called him into the kitchen. She had an envelope in her hand. "This came for you," she said with a small smile. It was from the local university, an invitation to speak at a youth leadership event. The letter talked about empathy, civic responsibility, and courage under pressure. Malik read it twice, then looked up. "Why me?" His mother smiled softly. "Because people listened, baby. And maybe they need to again." He hesitated. "I'm not a leader, Mom. I'm just me." She reached across the table, touched his hand. "That's exactly why you should go." He didn't say yes right away. But later that night, he found himself writing notes on a sheet of paper, trying to figure out what he'd even say if he did. At the top, he wrote one sentence. "It's okay to be scared and still do what's right." That became his beginning. The auditorium wasn't large, just 100 students and teachers. Still, Malik's hands trembled as he stood at the podium. He wasn't used to people staring at him with expectation instead of suspicion. He looked out across the room and took a deep breath. "I'm not here to talk about a viral video," he began. I'm here to talk about what came before it, and what came after." His voice was soft at first, but steady. He talked about the fear he felt that night, about his mother's voice reminding him to stay calm, about the silence that taught him strength. He didn't preach. He didn't perform. He just spoke honestly. And when he finished, there was a stillness, not applause yet, but the kind of pause where people are really hearing. Then one student raised her hand. "How do you stay calm when people judge you before they know you?" Malik thought for a moment. "You remember that their judgment isn't your truth. You hold your peace like it's something you built yourself. Because it is." Afterward, people came up to shake his hand, but he felt something deeper than pride, a sense of quiet clarity. Maybe this was what he was meant to do. A few weeks later, Malik started a small initiative with his old history teacher and a few classmates. They called it the Listening Project. The idea was simple: pair local teens with police officers, not for lectures or training, but for conversations, honest ones. No uniforms, no badges, no scripts. At first, only a handful of people came. By the third session, the room was full. There were awkward silences at the start of every meeting, but slowly, those silences softened into questions. Questions turned into stories. Stories turned into understanding. One evening, after everyone left, Malik stayed behind with Daniels, who had volunteered to help. "Never thought I'd see this," Daniels said quietly. Malik smiled. "Neither did I. You're doing something good here, Malik. Really good." "Trying to," Malik replied. "It's not perfect. But it's real." Daniels nodded. "That's enough." They stood in silence for a moment, not the uneasy kind this time, but the kind that felt like peace finally settling in a space that had once held fear. Healing wasn't quick. It came slowly, in small pieces, in every conversation that didn't end in anger, in every misunderstanding that found a bridge instead of a wall. Malik still had days when the memory of that night caught him off guard. A siren in the distance, a sudden light, and for a heartbeat, he'd feel 17 again, standing in the street under a buzzing lamp. But then he'd breathe, remember where he was, and let it pass. He started seeing a counselor at school who helped him talk through it. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she told him once. He smiled a little. "I think sometimes being honest is stronger than being strong." She nodded. "Exactly." That session stayed with him. He learned that healing wasn't pretending you were fine. It was letting the pain breathe until it got lighter. One Saturday afternoon, Malik and his mom went grocery shopping. As they stood in line, he noticed Daniels a few registers away, dressed casually, his daughter helping unload a cart. Daniels looked up and caught his eye. For a moment, the world shrank to that brief exchange, the memory of fear, the weight of what had changed, and the quiet truth that both of them had grown since that night. Daniels smiled first, just a small, respectful nod. Malik nodded back. No words, no tension, just understanding. Later, his mom asked, "Was that who I think it was?" Malik nodded. "Yeah." She looked at him. "You okay?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think I am." It wasn't forgiveness in a dramatic sense, no apologies or speeches. It was forgiveness in the simplest form, letting the past rest where it belonged. By summer, Malik had been invited to mentor younger students through a youth leadership program. At first, he felt too young for the role, still learning, still figuring out who he was. But when he met the group, he realized how much he'd already learned about patience and presence. There was one boy, Devon, who reminded him of himself, quiet, thoughtful, always watching before speaking. During one session, Devon admitted he'd been stopped recently while riding his bike home at dusk. They said I matched a description, the boy murmured. It wasn't me. I didn't even know what to say. Malik listened carefully. Did you stay calm? Yeah, Devon said. But I was shaking. Malik nodded. That's okay. Calm doesn't mean you don't feel scared. It just means you don't let fear take your words away. Devon looked at him and nodded slowly. For the first time, Malik saw in someone else what he'd learned himself, that strength could live quietly, without needing to shout. In August, Malik received a letter in the mail. He'd been awarded the scholarship named after his story, the one the non-profit had started months ago. It would cover his first year of college. He read the letter twice, then handed it to his mom. She pressed it to her chest, eyes filling with tears. I told you, baby, she whispered. Something good would come out of it. Malik smiled. Yeah, but I think the good part already happened. She tilted her head. What do you mean? He shrugged lightly. People started listening. She nodded. And they'll keep listening, long as people like you keep speaking. He didn't know if she was right, but he hoped she was. College started quietly, without fanfare. Malik studied sociology and art, the two things that helped him understand the world and himself. On campus, few people recognized him now. It was a relief to be anonymous again, to walk across a courtyard without whispers. But sometimes, after class, a student would stop him. You're the guy from that video, right? He'd nod. I just wanted to say thank you. He always answered the same way. You're welcome. Stay calm, all right? It wasn't a motto. It was a reminder, one that belonged to anyone who needed it. Even as he built a new routine, letters still found him. Teachers wrote to say they used his story in lessons about justice. Parents thanked him for showing their kids a different kind of strength. He kept the letters in a shoebox under his bed, not out of pride, but gratitude, proof that quiet could travel further than noise. One letter stood out. It was from a police cadet in another state. I joined because of you. I used to think being strong meant being in control. Now I think it means staying human. Malik read that line over and over. It reminded him of something Daniels once said. Control doesn't always mean authority. Sometimes it means listening. He realized then that the ripple hadn't just spread, it had multiplied. At the end of his first year, Malik returned home for summer break. The neighborhood looked the same, but the air felt different, gentler, slower, almost proud. The corner store owner waved when he saw him. A few neighbors asked about college. Even the streetlight that once flickered now shone steady. One evening, Malik took his familiar walk, the same one from that night long ago. The same path, but he was no longer the same boy. He paused where it had all happened, listening to the steady hum of the light above him. He felt no anger, no fear, just peace. He whispered, I'm still walking home. The wind rustled the trees as if answering back. A few days later, he visited the community center. The listening project was still going strong, now run by new volunteers. They invited him to speak at the closing session for the season. He stood before the group, officers, students, parents, and said, sometimes the hardest part isn't the fight. It's the patience after, the waiting, the talking, the trying again. He paused, looking around the room. I learned that forgiveness isn't about letting go of what happened. It's about not letting it own you anymore. We all have to forgive something, maybe ourselves, maybe each other. There was no applause when he finished, just nods, quiet understanding. The kind of silence that once made him nervous now felt sacred. As Malik walked home that night, he realized how far he'd come. From fear to peace. From confusion to purpose. He thought of all the people who had helped him get there. His mother, his teachers, Daniel's, the community, even strangers online. Every conversation, every act of listening, had shaped the person he was becoming. He wasn't trying to be a hero anymore. He was just trying to be kind, to himself, to others, to the world that had once scared him. Back in his room, he opened his notebook and began to write. Maybe transformation isn't a single moment. Maybe it's every small choice to stay open when the world tells you to close. Every time you forgive before you're asked to. Every time you speak, even when your voice shakes. He closed the notebook and smiled. Outside, the night was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt full instead of empty. He turned off his lamp, the same way he always did, and as the darkness settled around him, he realized something simple but true. He had found peace, not because the world was perfect, but because he had learned how to keep calm in its imperfection. Years passed. The world changed, slowly and unevenly, the way it always does. Technology advanced, politics shifted, faces in the news came and went. But some moments stayed. Some stories lingered, not because they were loud, but because they whispered something true. Malik's story was one of them. He had grown into a man now, taller, calmer, with a quiet steadiness that people felt more than they saw. He still wore that same soft composure in his eyes, the kind that told you he'd seen chaos and learned how to meet it with stillness. He was 29 now, a mentor, an advocate, an artist. He still lived in the same city, though in a small apartment above a bookstore that smelled of paper and peace. Outside his window, the same street stretched below, the one where it all began. He could still trace every step of that walk home. He could still feel the way the air had hung heavy that night, how the silence had almost spoken before he did. Only now, that silence no longer carried fear. It carried memory and meaning. Every year, on the anniversary of that night, Malik walked back to that corner. It wasn't a ritual of sadness, but one of gratitude, for survival, for growth, for understanding. This time, the streetlight stood tall and steady. The bulb had long been replaced. It glowed soft and golden now, no longer flickering. Malik stood beneath it, hands in his pockets, and smiled faintly. A boy on a bicycle rode past, earbuds in, head nodding to some song Malik couldn't hear. He wondered if that boy knew this corner's history, if he'd ever seen the old video that once carried Malik's face across the world. Probably not. And that was okay. The world didn't need to remember his name. It just needed to remember the lesson. He looked up at the streetlight and whispered, "Still walking home." The words felt softer now, not defiance, not defense, just peace. Malik had built a life out of the calm he once fought to hold. He worked with community groups, helping young people find their voices before the world could take them. He spoke at schools and gatherings, not about fame or fear, but about presence, about what happens when you choose patience instead of anger, understanding instead of assumption. He often told them, "I didn't plan to be a symbol. I just wanted to go home." But maybe home is what we build when we decide not to fight the wrong way. Some of the kids listened quietly, nodding. Others asked if he ever forgave the officers. His answer was always the same. "Yes," he said, "because forgiveness freed me before it freed them." Malik never stopped drawing. His art had become his second voice, gentle, symbolic, reflective. He painted scenes of small humanity, hands reaching, faces listening, people standing together in quiet strength. One of his pieces, titled "The Pause," was displayed in the city's cultural center. It showed two silhouettes beneath a single streetlight, both shadows blending into the same circle of light. The plaque beside it read, "Inspired by a real moment of misunderstanding turned into dialogue. Dedicated to everyone who learns to listen before they speak." People stood before that painting for a long time, not because it was loud or colorful, but because it was calm, and in that calm they saw themselves. Sometimes Malik opened the old shoebox of letters he'd kept. The edges were yellowing now, but the words still carried warmth. He reread the note from the police cadet, the one who'd written, "Being strong means staying human." He wondered where that cadet was now. Maybe an officer, maybe a teacher, maybe just someone who remembered that one sentence when it mattered most. That was enough. He didn't need statues or streets named after him. He believed the truest legacy lived quietly, in habits, in conversations, in the way someone decided to act when no one was filming. A few years later, Malik was invited to speak at a high school, not far from his own old one. He almost said no, but something told him to go. When he arrived, the students were restless, the way young people always are. He smiled, remembering himself at that age, full of energy, questions, impatience for the world to make sense. He began simply, "I once thought courage meant being loud. Now I think it means being steady." He told them his story, the short version, the night, the question, the silence that followed. One student raised her hand. "Do you think things are better now?" Malik thought carefully before answering. "They're different," he said. "Better in some ways, harder in others. But if even one person learns to pause before judging, that's a kind of progress." Another asked, "Would you do it all over again?" He smiled gently. "Yes, because I didn't choose the moment, but I chose who I was in it. That's something no one can take." After the talk, a teacher handed him a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the students. "Thank you for reminding me that calm isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to stay strong." He folded it carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket, another small ripple added to the countless unseen ones. That night, Malik took a walk again, not out of nostalgia, but out of peace. The city had changed. New shops, brighter lights, fewer cracks in the sidewalks. But as he passed the corner of Maple and Ninth, the air felt the same. He stopped beneath the streetlight, hands resting at his sides. The wind brushed softly against his face, carrying faint echoes of that night years ago. He remembered the voice. "What are you doing out here?" And his own answer, "Just walking home." He smiled to himself. He was still walking home, in every sense of the word. Still learning, still teaching, still choosing calm over chaos. He whispered, almost to the night itself. Sometimes, one calm voice can echo louder than all the noise. The words drifted upward, caught by the air, spreading like a quiet ripple through the sleeping city. Years later, long after Malik had moved on to new projects, the story resurfaced again, not on the front page, but in small ways. A teacher used it in a civics lesson. A parent told it to a child after dinner. A rookie officer heard it during training. It had become folklore, not about fame or confrontation, but about patience, presence, and humanity. And that was enough for Malik. He never needed to own the story again. He just hoped it kept moving like a soft current, invisible but changing the shape of things all the same. In his apartment one evening, Malik sat by the window, sketching lazily in his notebook. The city outside hummed with life. Cars, laughter, footsteps. He smiled, feeling the rhythm of it, the balance of noise and quiet that made the world what it was. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who had stood under the old, flickering light, scared but steady. He wished he could reach back through time, rest a hand on that boy's shoulder, and say, "You did enough. You were enough." He closed his notebook and looked out at the night. The same streetlight glowed in the distance, steady and warm. He whispered once more, "Still walking home." Then he leaned back, eyes half closed, breathing in the calm he had built. No crowds, no noise, no headlines, just peace. And somewhere in that stillness, the world seemed to whisper back. Sometimes, one calm voice can echo louder than all the noise.